ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits. It ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/threatlocker. Digital threats evolve rapidly, making it difficult for security teams to keep pace. Tyne's security automation and orchestration is different from traditional SOAR. It allows teams to move faster and make better decisions in real time. With Tyne's, analysts and engineers have everything they need to automate the processes they're closest to, regardless of complexity. Built by security practitioners for security practitioners, Tynes powers mission-critical security workflows at McKesson, Canva, and Mars. Start building for free at securityweekly.com/Tynes. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. This interview is sponsored by Aryaka. Renuka Nadkarni joins us today to talk about Unified SASE as a service. Renuka is the Chief Product Officer at Aryaka. Welcome to the show, Renuka.
Great to be here, Adrian.
Am I saying all that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. And yeah, very interesting. I've followed this market for a long time, going all the way back to when I was a industry analyst at 451 Research. I remember when CASB emerged, just as in some of the other components that we now refer to as SASE. Were all emerging around the same time, in like 2012, 2013. So it's a market that I followed for a while, that I find very interesting, and eager to dig into what this is. So I guess just starting out, for folks who maybe aren't particularly familiar with SASE, maybe we should start there and explain what the general components of SASE are, because I think vendors, there's some slight differences in how vendors define it, and there's even like two different acronyms. There's SASE and SSE, right?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So I think before we even talk about SASE, I think I would really like to take a step back and talk about like the overall changes that we have been going through over the last couple of decades. So I guess like at a very basic, right, we are going through a very massive network modernization phase, which is back in the day. Users used to be in the office and applications used to be in the data center. And the way the networks were designed in the first place was to really provide this connectivity between your office location and your data centers where your applications were, and making sure that you optimize it for the best performance and security and so on and so forth. And from that perspective, people typically had something like a MPLS. They would have a perimeter firewall, they will have perimeter security, and that was like how the traditional legacy networks were designed to begin with. What has happened clearly over the period of time is we live in a very hybrid cloud uh, environment where users are, of course, working from home. There is a hybrid work environment. And the applications are no more in the four walls of your data center. They are cloud hosted. They can be SaaS delivered. They can be in a very hybrid mode. So the fundamental approach of the design principles of how people thought about network connectivity, security, availability, all of those things have gone for a toss because the legacy designs were really optimized for this point to point connectivity, and now we live in this world where users are everywhere, applications are everywhere, so it's really a n is to n sort of conversation. And I think within that we solve the compute problem clearly, but the networking and security problem is something which is fast evolving. And we saw SD-WAN come in to sort of help with some of these networking challenges. And then, of course, there were different security, distributed security, hybrid security conversations that came in. So I think the way SASE has evolved, and what customers are really looking for is a solution to this modern network architecture where there is an N is to N relationship. And the question is, how do I provide the best connectivity, availability, and how do I secure this traffic from the get go? If that makes sense.
It does, and thank you for that. That's really what I like to do with these conversations is lay that foundational groundwork so people understand like where we've come from, where we're going, and even the roles. The buyers that you see, I imagine, have changed over the years as well. Where we used to have very specific titles and roles tied to very specific networking functions and storage functions and things like that. I think even a lot of those roles today, what I would have thought of as a network engineer, a lot of that is they're doing a lot more functions than they would have originally. I don't know if these days you still have people entirely focused on just firewall, but I imagine at a lot of organizations, it's they're responsible for a lot more. I would imagine because they're doing it all from one console these days, right?
Exactly. Yes, yes, exactly. And I think there is another whole dimension of, even in terms of the security consciousness or the sensitivity has gone through the roof. Back in the day, the security things were like good to have, and there were people, of course, who are, like say finance, banking, insurance, those kinds of verticals coming from regulated industries, clearly had a lot of budget towards it. But more common enterprises typically did not have budget allocations for the security capabilities, generally speaking, right? And what has happened is over the decade, like in the last at least in the last 5 years especially, criminals have been more democratic, so they don't discriminate between a bank and a factory or a mine. So we are seeing like attacks which are actually more like ransomware attacks, which everybody is equally susceptible to. These are not just, I mean, of course there are apts out there which are more targeted attacks and trying to get like high value data and so on. But I guess there is of course a very massive shift. Attack tools are highly available. We talked about how AI is being used nowadays. In fact, ChatGPT had the in fact, I think I recently read ChatGPT had a public kind of like revelation that there were bad actors who were using their resources to in fact write malware code, try out and test things. So the availability of resources to the bad actors has also changed these dynamics dramatically. So back in the day when people like thought, oh, I don't really need to allocate security budget, I'm not the one who's going to get attacked, it's always like someone else. That has changed significantly. And I think that way of thinking has influenced the way the organizations and the teams think. I actually had a very funny incident once. I was in a customer briefing and there were like 20 people in the room, and I have a habit of asking people like in which team you are from, and are you from networking team, security team. That's like I usually start my conversations, just trying to figure out like the roles. And I made the mistake of asking like, so are you from networking team and security team, do you want to introduce yourself? And it so happened they were actually one of the early adopters of security, a defense contractor. And that guy stopped me and he said, hey, look, everybody is in security team. Because security is not like one person's or one team's problem. You need to have end-to-end security. And I was like, okay, I mean, yes, I get it, right? So there is that awareness that's also building in the organizations and in the teams, as you rightly pointed out. Today there's not like just one designation where I'm only a network engineer, I don't need to worry about security, right? I mean, it doesn't work that way. So yes, that's exactly what we are seeing as well.
Yeah, and it's constantly evolving too. It's you know the and it's interesting as the attacks evolve. Also like the base of what an endpoint has in terms of security and what a network, the connection between the employee and the enterprise, what's there is so much more than it used to be. Like you're talking about the old days. I remember just to use endpoint security as an example because that's was also one of my coverage areas. Like if you wanted to host firewall, that was a separate product. It wasn't built into Windows. It wasn't built into Mac OS. That was a product that you bought. Sometimes you buy a VPN client. Sometimes you would buy host into host IPS or something like that. And then eventually all that got compiled into a single product. So we've seen this platformization, process occur here, where it really doesn't make sense to buy all these as separate products, have to integrate them together, have a different console for each of them. So it seems like that's what's that's the unified SASE here, right? Is you're bringing all these pieces together. And also back in the day, everything was a separate appliance that we'd have to rack and stack in our data center, right? So that's the as a service model here as well, where now I just have I guess, a dumb pipe to the internet, and everything that's added on, much to the telecom's dismay, is happens via a third party now.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And in fact, whenever I think about security architectures, right, there are some fundamental like laws of physics, right, which is there is a user and then there's an application. Typically, there are, as you mentioned, endpoint solutions, right, which kind of put a wrapper around the user, create a bubble wrap and protect them, and anything that's coming in and out, you kind of manage that from an endpoint security perspective. Then you have applications, and they themselves have front doors, like you can only access me if you meet these conditions, and there's like whole application security of all of those pieces, right? And then there is always a connection between the two, which is security during transit, or inline security as we call it. And that's where you have those SASE features. Primarily, that's where you also have these SSE features that exist. So no matter how you look at it, you need all three security enforcement points. You need security closer to the user, you need security closer to the application, and you need security during the transit, because the kinds of problems we are solving in each of those places is slightly different, right? So when we talk about SASE, and specifically uh, our qualifier for SASE is Unified SASE as a service. And both of those things, the unified concept and as a service concept, are actually very they have like a lot of deep meaning. Because what we say is, don't get network connectivity unless you have security baked into it. Okay. And that's what we mean by unified. So the way we build our architecture is, it's a single pass architecture. We call it one pass architecture. And every time a traffic flow comes to us, packet stream comes to us, we apply all networking services like WAN optimization, deduplication, compression, and so on. And then we encrypt that traffic, and we apply all security services as well, as we go through the transit, which includes like a stateful inspection with NGFW kind of technologies, which applies to all port protocols. Then we do proxy, which is more SSL decryption, HTTPS inspection, and then application layer attack detection and mitigation. So when the traffic comes in, we apply all networking and security technologies together in a single, what we call as a process to completion manner. And that is the true unification that we talk about. And we say, do not connect to the internet or any place without security baked into that architecture, right? So that's the unified part of the conversation. The as a service part of the conversation is really this whole evolution where everything that was an appliance is now being offered as a service. Like, we are going through this massive shift. And you can have all these networking security together in a hardware, in an appliance. But when you try to build something as a service, because when you say transit, right, you are really, so we are like globally distributed mesh, network connectivity, right? So we have we own the backbone, we have what's called as the underlay, and we apply all these things for the traffic that is in transit. And which is why we can capture any traffic coming from the offices, the remote users, home users, and no matter where they are going, whether they're going to the internet, to the cloud, to the SaaS applications, to their own data centers, right? And so the combination of applying these things and universally as a service is what we are offering, which we call as Unified SASE as a service.
Yeah, and and I imagine this can all be configured through the same interfaces, the same APIs and things like that as well. Yeah, and I'm curious, among your customers, uh, you know, and this is a question I think worth asking every couple of years, it's interesting in some categories, particularly when they involve data handling, data management. We almost see a push back to the enterprise, back to, I have to manage this, at least if it's not in my data center, in my cloud, because there's some data residency requirement, that there, things get complicated if that data leaves the country of Germany or Switzerland or something like that. Those tend to be the easy examples. But what is kind of the split there? Is this are these products that you implement on appliances as well, or just as a service? And what's kind of the split there? How much pushback do you see in terms of you supplying it as a service versus them wanting to run it themselves somewhere, whether it's in the cloud or on prem or something?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, in fact, we talk about the security enforcement closest to the source. So, all our security enforcement happens locally on the CPE device, which is fully managed by our cloud platform as a service. So the enforcement is what we call as a distributed data plane. It happens directly on the CPE, and it has many benefits. Like first and foremost is clearly it's more secure because it's closer to the source of origin of the network traffic. And we do full SSL decryption at the customer side. We also do
And those are the ANAPs, what you
those are
call
the
ANAP?
ANAPs. We call them,
Mhm.
it's Aryaka network access points, ANAPs. And ANAPs do like full SSL decryption. We apply all the capabilities that I mentioned, everything I mentioned, like NGFW, IPS, SWG, URL filtering, all of those anti-malware. Every single thing is applied directly at the closest to the source of where the traffic is generated. The second benefit of that is it's extremely performant. And this is something which, as a security vendor, when you build security products, your biggest nightmare is performance. We are a networking origin, right? So for us, that performance comes like a second nature to us. And when we make some of these decisions, they are actually very interesting because now you don't need to backhaul all this traffic to a cloud provider, right? So typically, if you think of any SSE architecture, most SSE vendors, their way of processing this is they take the traffic from wherever it is generated, wherever the source might be. They take it to their cloud where they do the inspection and all kinds of stuff, right? And from that point onwards, they either send it to the internet or wherever the traffic is actually going. So you think about it, it is so inefficient because you're using the WAN bandwidth. You are actually collecting all these data and pushing it to some other location. And one of the biggest challenges that we hear from SSE vendors is, how do I transfer data from point A to my cloud? Like, how do I get it there? And then you do things like, you do pack file redirection. You say, okay, I'm going to set up a some kind of a tunnel. And all of those have so many opportunities for to be bypassed. There are so many different bypass evasion techniques that people can use so that you don't actually go through that, right? So I think, just from a security perspective, it's of course much more secure to do this distributed the way we have architected it. But it's also extremely performant, and that's one of the things we always talk about, which is you don't have to make a compromise between performance and security anymore. You can actually get both.
Yeah, and I do. I'm old enough to remember the days when there was an argument against using HTTPS, which sounds inconceivable today. That you would even try to make an argument for not encrypting traffic between a client and a web server. But performance was, one of the complaints there. But yeah, it's easy to forget like how amazing things are with SSDs and everybody having gigabit internet at home, and so even your remote workers, in some cases might have better performance than at the office in some cases.
Exactly. Yes, that's true.
So we can do really cool stuff now.
Yeah. No, exactly right. Exactly right.
So yeah, try and throw, you know, talking about security. There's not a lot of like hopeful messages to find sometimes. So yeah, try and remind people how far we've come.
Yes, I remember all along when I built security products, the conversations always were, can I put this in monitor mode? Can I do it out of band? Does this work off the span port, right? Like, I mean, you always had to deal with those conversations first. Like, how can I not be in the network traffic, or how, make sure that you don't break my business? Because the goals of security and the business were not always aligned. And the first time when I built a DDoS product, I was so happy because my goals and the business goals were aligned for the first time ever, right? So now that security needs are driven less by compliance and regulatory needs, like back in the day, that was more like one of the drivers, right? Now it is driven by business needs, right? And that alignment between the security and the business goals being the same is actually, I think, one of the main reasons why SASE is has gained so much popularity, because that's, it's really necessary for me to run my business more effectively, in a cost effective way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I remember the one time we put in, I got my start at a payment processor, and the one time we put an IPS in line and it failed closed. and network traffic was directly related to revenue, because they were credit card transactions. Yeah, that was, never again was security allowed to touch the network after that. So it was, that was a hard lesson. Um, but yeah, it's great to see this evolve to this point. I never thought I'd see so many. Yeah, I'm just looking at the diagram that you have of the one pass architecture, and yeah, it's so much, so
Yes,
much provided here.
one of the biggest conundrum we had to deal with was, if you think like a firewall, right? You always have everything closed, and you're like, everything is like denied unless I know what it is. Only then I'm gonna allow it, right? But if you think of it from a SWG side of the world, right? Typically, when people were making decisions about the internet access, they knew deterministically that I want to block these categories of website, okay? But then there were lots of unknowns because every day there are millions of new websites that are popping up. And I had customers who would basically say, if you don't know what it is, I would rather you allow it instead of deny default, right? So when we are looking at building SASE, one of the things that was very interesting conversation was, what should our stance be? Like, should we like block everything and selectively allow?
Default allow, default
Default
deny. Yeah.
deny, right? And then of course you can create a policy. So then we of course have a default policy which is configurable. Like, you tell us what is your default ultimate configuration. But a lot of these small things really have a huge impact. In fact, this morning I was talking about AI traffic. Same thing, right? We are applying security to AI traffic, but the AI things are evolving so fast. There are new applications, there are new
Yeah.
protocols. Some of them we know, some of them we don't know. What are we doing with unknown, right? Like, how are we handling those? So it's a very interesting mix of challenges, and SASE is kind of like in between, trying to please everybody, trying to solve both sides of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah, and AI is a tough one. I talk to a lot of organizations about that, and it's because oftentimes it's a feature. It's not just a product. Sure, Chat GPT you could think of as an AI product, but then what happens with Notion when they throw AI into their product? Now it's a feature of the product, or Dropbox throws AI into the product. It doesn't suddenly become an AI product. So how do you handle that from an SWG standpoint, right? Like Dropbox is still going to be enterprise file sync and share. It's still going to be in that category. It's not going to be suddenly shifted over. So yeah, a lot of nuance there. So talking about what's possible now and in the future, what are some of the things you're looking forward to that you have in the roadmap for this? Because this is a fairly new product, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. So the thing is, the product is not new per se, because we have been building our architecture for over a decade, right? Because we have a globally dispersed infrastructure, pops, and we operate in 100 plus countries. And if you just think about the magnitude of that complexity, just being able to like operate and like have a license to run in any place, right? It takes a ton of even the administrative conversation, right? So it's like we are not that new. We are definitely grown over a decade. What we did was we added new capabilities to, like I said, our already what we were doing from a networking side of things. We started adding controls on top of it. And all the security eventually is some kind of a network control. You either drop the packet, drop the connection, reset the connection. So there is only finite kind of actionable controls that you take from a security point of view. So what we did was we used the existing networking infrastructure that we have, and we started adding these controls on top of it. And where we are going is we are really solving the problems that are here and now. And coming back to the challenges that AI brings, right? So AI has the potential of bypassing all your security controls. Like, so you had SWG, and in SWG you said you're allowed to access these categories, or this content, and you're not allowed to access some other content or other categories. Today, one of the things people do is they go to like ChatGPT and they say, go scrape this website, or go figure what this website is saying, give me the gist of it, or provide me the intent. So now you don't even have the ability to intercept that traffic, because this traffic is actually going between chat gpt and whatever it is being asked to do. Okay, so the challenge that we have today is everything that we know, and the way we knew, right, like how to enforce all these controls, right, is changing significantly, right? And I think we have to evolve in our the way we think about this is AI is just yet another kind of traffic for us. Like, just like when there was public cloud, you needed to do fast access to public cloud assets, as well as you had to do security for public cloud assets. Similarly, with SaaS applications, CASB was born out of the need to secure those. We feel like AI is yet another traffic type. The benefit that we have is because we are a network provider and connectivity provider from the get go, we have the luxury of actually displaying everything that's going on our network, that the customer's traffic, show it to the customer and say, hey, these are all the things that your users are using. How many of these are sanctioned? Do you recognize these AI applications? And then we can do further parsing of the data, and we can do even checking for like data leakage, like DLP, knowledge leakage for IP, and so on and so forth. So we are very excited about like how the core and the architecture, the one pass architecture that we built like almost a decade ago, how it has very nicely evolved and morphed to solve today's problems.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, the strategy with AI. I don't know if you're using anything. Are you using AI at all within the product, or is this mostly from like a SWG standpoint? Helping people with some visibility and enforcement of whether or not employees can go out and use SaaS services like Chat GPT.
Yeah, so let's spend maybe like a minute talking about that, right? So, see, first and foremost, what we are seeing is just from a network connectivity perspective, people are struggling, and we hear that people are using hard disks to transfer data, because one of the most common AI use cases is internal searches, and for you to do that, you need to have the right training and the data available. If you look at how the data is dispersed today, and if you try to get it to a place, it can completely exhaust your WAN bandwidth, and leaving all other applications have no connectivity. So customers are struggling to just do this data transfer, and they're using this hard disk, like I said, to transfer data. The
Using FedEx. I remember we talked about on the prep call. Yeah, people using FedEx to transfer data because it was more reliable. That
It was
cracked
more
me up.
reliable, and it was like faster, right? Because it's such a like shortcut, right? But first when I heard it, I thought it was some kind of a anomaly, and just somebody mentioned it, or like sort of funny, right? Funny anecdote. But sure enough, I was talking to like one of our data center partners, and they said, oh, I have an Excel sheet that we maintain, and you tell us what is your pricing for each of these things, and we can compare. I'm like, okay, it's not just about pricing, it's about so many things that can go wrong when you ship hard disk and data, right? And then the second thing is AI is not an application, it's an ecosystem, right? When you use an AI application, you connect to 4 different places. So offering that uninterrupted connectivity is actually the so we are solving like really like basic ground zero problems. We are not even talking about anything dramatic at this point in time, right? So we launched AI Perform, which is allowing our customers to avail data, avail AI, and accelerate their AI adoption. AI Secure is actually access control to begin with. Which users, which applications, where are they going, parsing the protocols, opening them up to see what's in there. Is there any kind of malicious traffic, attack traffic, so on and so forth. And then AI Observe is essentially just giving them more insights as well as learning. So this third part is actually where we are using AI. So the first two are more about helping people adopt AI, but the third one is where we are actually using AI to figure out, now that I have this data, these patterns, what can I make out of it? Like, how can I train the models and learn something from this?
Okay, yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think any vendor where you find yourself in a position with a lot of data, for a particular customer, generative AI, even machine learning models can help you spot anomalies or summarize data. There's so many opportunities there. I think we're just starting to see, uh, um, folks dive into what's possible there.
Exactly.
All right. Well, this has been great, Renuka. Thank you so much for joining Enterprise Security Weekly today. I learned a lot.
Yes, it was fun as always chatting with you, Adrian, and looking forward to doing more of these.
And for those listening, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Aryaka to learn more, particularly if you go to the Aryaka One Pass architecture or the One Pass link. I think the architecture diagram there explains a lot. I love an architecture diagram. So that's where I tend to point people to understand the service and what you're providing here. Um, Thanks again, Renuka. And we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.